morning. We're going to be starting off this morning in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 through 8. We're going to be talking about Elijah, the prophet Elijah, and some of the struggles that he was going through. And I think a lot of times, so often when we see these stories of what people are maybe suffering through in the Bible, or what God helps them overcome, or whatever struggles they may face, we can see ourselves in this person quite a bit. And, you know, sometimes it's easy to idolize, or not even necessarily idolize, but put on a pedestal biblical figures as these great and amazing, powerful people who are so much more able than we are, or so much more accomplished than we could ever be. And not one of them has a thing that we do apart from God's work in their lives. Not one of them is a better person or a more capable person, or there's nothing that they've done with God that we can't do with God. And there's nothing that God did through them that he can't do through our own lives. So we need to remember that as we read these stories and we see these things that people experienced. Look at how they turned to God. Look at how God worked on them. We see God's nature. We see his character. We see how he interacts with his people and why. And we see his heart for them. And so when we see someone struggling with something in the Bible and we see ourselves in it, make sure you keep looking until you see what God did in their life, because he can do the same thing in ours. And James, I believe it's chapter 5, he talks about Elijah, basically saying he was a man just like we are. He was a human just like we are. And we need to remember not to elevate people in the biblical accounts to a point that what they experience seems unattainable to us. Because God can work on us the same way he worked on them. I'm going to begin us at verse 1 in 1 Kings chapter 19. And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with a sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life, and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him, and said to him, "Arise and eat." And then he looked, and there by his head was a cake, baked on coals, and a jar of water. So he ate, and he drank, and he lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back the second time, and touched him, and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he arose, and he ate, and he drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights, as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. You also hear that referred to as Mount Sinai. Right off the bat, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. Well, now wait a minute. If we take this out of context, and this is the first thing we see about Elijah and the first thing we see about this story, he kind of looks like the bad guy. I mean, we hear all these accounts of God's prophets being killed throughout history in the Bible by evil people. Here we're seeing Elijah killed all the prophets. He sounds like he's the bad guy. But they weren't God's prophets. They were false prophets. They were prophets to the false god Baal in that just monumental story from the previous chapter where we see Elijah, one prophet of God's, go up against 450 false prophets of the false god Baal and prove to everyone there who the true God was. God sent fire from heaven to prove just who he was. And I would love to recap a lot of that story and even the stories before that. But for the sake of time, go back and read those if you don't know them well. But he, after God had sent this fire and proven himself and proved that There is no Baal. Everything they did nothing. And God instantly took them all out, or took out this offering that was laid on an altar with fire from heaven. And Elijah had all these false prophets executed. Now this should have been, well, it was. It was a monumental event in his life. It was a mountaintop experience. But it should have been so much more for him. But something that I think a lot of times we'll find is after some great, uplifting, big mountaintop experience, there can be a low valley coming right afterwards. Sometimes the highs are followed by the lows. And sometimes when something wonderful happens, we can feel really down afterwards. It's almost like puts me in mind of like a sugar crash or something like that. You know, the kids get into the Halloween candy and they are just so sugared up and wound up and just amped, and then they're just boom, they're down. And sometimes this happens because, you know, we've expended so much energy and it takes its toll on us. But sometimes we come under attack. When we're doing God's work and serving Him, and He is working powerfully through that can put a target on our back for the enemy sometimes. And sometimes we can come under attack from this. And this Jezebel was about the most wicked enemy that he could have had from a human perspective. And she says something that sounds kind of wordy. It's not a way that we would normally talk. She tells him, she sends a messenger to Elijah, and she says, "So let the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." So to translate that, I'm going to kill you just like you killed them. And if I don't do it by tomorrow, may these gods kill me. She wanted desperately to have him taken down because she was the biggest proponent for Baal in all the nation. She, you know, this Ahab that we mentioned, he was the king, but he was this weak and spineless guy who really, she was propping him up. She was the one helping him accomplish things and helping him to, you know, he had the power, but she was the power behind him. And she brought this pagan worship heavily, and she was a big proponent for Baalism. And this just, it kind of crushes him when he sees this. It says, when he saw that, he arose and he ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and he left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die and said, "It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." They had just come out of this massive drought. And when God had this victory through Elijah, the rain started coming. He's racing back to town to get ahead of Ahab to get back to town. And you would think that he was about to see some amazing things happen. You would think that he was about to see some powerful change for God in this place. Because what do we see so many times throughout the Old Testament? There would be a wicked ruler, and God would act in a powerful way, and that ruler would realize this is the true God and lead the people around him to follow God. Even Babylonian kings and leaders. So he's probably thinking, you know, everybody's going to know about this. God's bringing the rain back. God just defeated all of these false pagan prophets. I'm going to go back and we're going to see this nation turn around real quick. Everybody's going to turn to God. They're going to see that this Baalism is this false nonsense. Why didn't Jezebel just send an assassin to him? She wants him dead, right? Obviously, she sent a messenger straight to him. Why not send a messenger with a sword? Why not send somebody to just kill him then and there? Why is she messing around? She couldn't take any chances. She didn't want a chance making him into a martyr for the people to see. But in effect, what she did was she scared him off. Whether she knew she would ever be able to, or was convinced in her own heart that she would be able to kill him or not, she ran him off. and he jetted out of that place, and now he's in a low and crushed state. He's hiding under this tree, under this broom tree. You know, the broom tree is kind of an interesting thing in itself. It's a picture of one out in the desert. They're not massive trees. They're maybe 10 foot tall. The top of the tree might be about where that ceiling line is there. But if you're out in the wilderness and you're out in the desert, you're going to take any piece of shade you can get. These were useful to him. These were useful to the people. It was a lone and probably isolated place of refuge for him as he's running out through the wilderness and hiding in the shade that God provided. He needed to get away. He needed to get away from all of the things that were, in his mind, threatening to crush him. But something that I think is significant about this broom tree as well is the way it burns. It has some unique properties. First off, it's also called a juniper tree, but it's called a broom tree because you take these bristles and make brooms out of them. They're very thin, like broom bristles. They can be bundled together. They're strong, but they also burn in kind of a unique way. You know, when they look like they're completely burned to nothing, like a normal piece of wood would be, but they're still going inside. They're still burning inside. There's still hot embers that go on for a long time, to where they would actually burn these and keep the coals in the desert and put some sand over top of those coals because they would keep staying hot, and use that as almost a bed for warmth. Think of like heated seats in a car. You've got almost an underground ember fire going with some sand to lay on top of for warmth, because as you know, when you think of the desert, you think hot, but nighttime it's freezing. And I think this is a good illustration that he might have recognized at a time when he felt like his fire was about to burn out. He felt like everything left in him was probably down to the last spark. He's probably thinking, I just went through all of this, and what for? I put all this effort into something, and the word I shouldn't even be in there. He got to be a part of it. God did all the effort. God was the one who brought the power. But this thing that should have brought a nation to its knees, in his eyes, is having no impact. There are no people left of God's in this place. And what he is doing is a waste. What does he say there? Why does he want God to take his life? I'm no better than my fathers. He's not talking about his dad and his grandpa. He's talking about his predecessors. You hear the term church fathers. It's talking about the early church leaders and things like that. He's, I'm no better than anyone who's come before me. And that's one of the biggest places he's making a mistake here. He's comparing himself to others. That's where we sometimes break ourselves. This person, because we don't usually compare ourselves when we're down in the dumps. We're not comparing ourselves to somebody who's worse off than we are. If I'm in a low place, if you're in a low place, and you start comparing yourself to other people, it's to the people that you wish you were doing as well as. Man, look, why can't I do as good as them? We don't think, praise God, I'm doing better than so many others. It's like those little thoughts like, hey, you know, I'm having a bad day, but there's people out there without running water. You know, I had a bad day, but I woke up to have this bad day. He's comparing himself to his others, and he's at a point so low that, and maybe some of you have experienced this kind of feeling at some point in your life. God, just get me out of here. Can't take this place anymore. I'm sick of this place. Nothing good happens here. Everything, you can get into this cynicism. And he's lost sight of this amazing work God has done. Yes, this evil woman who is filling the nation with Baal worship is seeming to have a victory over him in his eyes. And no, she didn't get wiped out the moment all the rest of Baal's people got wiped out. But 450 people who were powerfully teaching the nation to go against God in one of the most wicked ways were just taken out of the equation. That's a big victory. And we don't see it in today's portion of this passage. I'm probably going to continue on next week, but he's struggling because he feels like he's the only one out there doing this. And God has to tell him, you know, there's still 7,000 people here that are faithful to me. And if you imagine if you were the only person here. Maybe there was 3 of us even, and that's it. And we don't know about anybody else out there. We don't get to hear about any other churches, any other believers. And we're studying God's word, and we're like thinking, how are we going to do anything to make an impact in this world? It's just 3 of us. There's 8 billion people out there. There's nobody else. We're never going to be able to do this. First off, we're looking at ourselves instead of what God can do. But what if God came along and said, no, there's thousands of you in every city. You just don't know about it. It's going to be encouraging to know that you're still in the fight. But he's at just such a place that he's given up. God, take my life. I can't do this anymore. And he's just at a broken point underneath this broom tree. Continuing at verse 5, it says, then as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And then he looked, and by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. And so he ate, and he drank, and he lay down again. Sometimes we feel like that end point, we feel like that super low point, because there are a lot of things making us feel that way. I tell you what, sometimes just being tired and hungry can make you feel that way, even when things aren't going wrong. Just being exhausted, just being, think about when a baby starts crying because it needs a bottle. Do you yell at it because it's hungry, or do you feed it and understand that that's why it was reacting that way? God doesn't strike him down. He knows that he's at a depleted state, for one thing. But when we fail to care for ourselves, kind of like on the airplane, you're supposed to put your own mask on before helping the kids with their masks. Because if we're not caring for ourselves, and we're letting ourselves go, and we're not getting the rest we need, and we're not getting the nourishment we need, we're going to be depleted in physical ways that can come out in spiritual and mental ways. There are times when I'm working on a construction project, and I've been on it for about 16 hours, and the only nail I can hit's on my thumb at that point because I'm so tired. And you just want to throw the tools and walk out. I've had times like that when I thought, I don't ever want to work on this stupid project again. And then I go to bed and I crash hard and I sleep good and I get up and I'm ready to get back at it. Sometimes we need that recharge. And Elijah was in a place where he really needed that recharge. And the symbolism of the things that he's seeing and experiencing go beyond that tree. Because what other story of Elijah does this kind of remind us of? He wakes up, and there was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. I don't have slides for this, but turn back just a couple chapters. Go to chapter 17. Let's go back a little bit. And we see the story of Elijah and the widow. There was a famine proclaimed in the land, and God didn't let any rain fall on the earth. But he provided for this widow and her son, and he provided for Elijah in a very specific and special way. I'm going to skip down a little bit here. In the middle of verse 10, he says, please bring to the widow, please bring me a little water and a cup that I may drink. And as she was going to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And so she said, as the Lord your God lives, I do not have any bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. And see, I am gathering a couple sticks so that I may go in and prepare it for myself and my son so that we may eat it and die. And Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you've said, but make me a small cake from it first, and bring it to me, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends the rain on the earth. So she went away and did according to the word of Elijah, and she and her household ate for many days. The bin of flour was not used up, nor did the jar of oil run dry, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Elijah. God used a little flour cake and a little jar of oil and refilled those bad boys, the flour and the oil, every single day throughout this entire time when they likely would have starved to death, to provide for them, to keep them going, to keep them strong, to keep them from dying. And what is he getting fed here? This angel taps him on the shoulder, he touches him, says, "Arise and eat," and there's a cake baked on coals in a jar. Not a jar of oil, thankfully. I'm sure he didn't want to drink that. A jar of water. But I'm sure having a little cake in that jar was probably a good reminder of what God did for him and that widow. Here he is saying, "God, take me, I'm just ready to die." And he's saying, remember these cakes and remember these jars, and you remember how that widow was ready to die, and you remember how I kept you going, how I sustained you through all of this. It's interesting how the angel approaches him too. God could have said, "Quit your whining and get up and let's go do this. I did all the heavy lifting. What are you complaining about?" But he's caring for him. He's trying to restore him. And he's being loving and gentle in how he does it. The angel could have just hollered like he was some kid that wouldn't get out of bed. "Hey, get up. Come on, let's go eat." He touched him and said to him. And sometimes a comforting touch can make all the difference. You know, somebody can say, "Hey, it's going to be okay." And somebody can say, "Hey, it's going to be okay." And sometimes that makes the biggest difference in the world, just having that connection. Imagine having an angel do that. Having an angel lay a hand on you and comfort you and reassure you. He says, "Here, eat this. Get some rest." He eats, he drinks, he lays down again. Verse 7, an angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." And that's the thing, that this journey is too great for a lot of us, apart from what God provides for us, apart from how he sustains us, apart from how he gives us his strength and his comfort. And you know, sometimes a little rest and food is restorative to us. It's interesting, you know, when Jesus was out in the wilderness and hadn't eaten for 40 days, he was being tempted with bread, and he said, "Man can't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And here we see someone who needs the bread. You know, God will sustain us, but sometimes it's through what we need. And maybe it's some cake and a jar of water. Maybe it's a person who's sent to help us. Maybe I'm sure everybody in here has a story of something that they were absolutely lacking in and hopeless to get for themselves or take care of for themselves, and God sent help in some kind of way that provided. And if we don't know what that story is, I'm sure it's happened, and we'll learn about it someday. It's amazing the ways that God works. And I can't help but wonder how many times they've been angels. The Bible said sometimes, you know, we may be interacting with angels and not know it. He knew this angel was bringing him food. Maybe an angel has ministered to us. I look forward to learning those things someday. But he knew that the journey was going to be too great for him. And he knew that he was going to need more sustenance and more energy. So he arose and he ate and he drank, and he went in the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. How powerful is this gift that he was completely depleted, and a couple little chunks of bread, cake, whatever they were, and a couple jars of water and some rest were able to sustain him without anything else for another 6 weeks as he's walking through the wilderness. I forget how far, I think it's like 250 miles, I think, that he had to walk from there. We know that what God gives us, multiplies. What God uses multiplies. I know that, any money that we give God is going to go much further in his hands than it would have ever gone in ours. This food that came from God's hand sustained him far much more than something that he could have procured on his own. And I think beyond just the food itself sustaining him for 40 days and 40 nights, I feel like I would be sustained for a long time knowing that I was at a place where I was ready to die and God himself showed up and brought me strength. He showed up and brought me rest and showed up and said, no, I'm not done with you. I love you. Here is what you need. Here is how you get better. I am with you. Even when you feel like you're alone under this tree in the middle of nowhere, even though you may feel like you're isolated and alone, did you notice he left his servant behind before he took off? I kind of think he was planning to die. Or maybe he was worried that that servant would get taken along with him. God wasn't done with him yet. And there's so many times when maybe we feel like, what's the point? Why bother? Get down in the dumps, you're like, why do I even keep trying? Nothing's happening. I'm not making any difference. Things are going to be what they're going to be. Why bother? And God says, I'm not done with you yet. If you're still here for a reason. And just like Elijah struggled with all the sufferings that he had and all of the fears that he had, many of them, it's hard because I like to say they're kind of ill-founded, but I get it to a degree. Based on his human nature and the things he experienced and just how exhausting spiritually and physically this would have been, I'm sure a lot of people could relate to him. But at the same time, if we've got a right view of God and we've got a right relationship with him and an understanding of who he is and how he works in our lives, it's going to sustain us far more than our own efforts. The things that we do, whether successful or unsuccessful or whatever, it doesn't matter if we're being faithful to God. I remember it was Michael Youssef on the radio one time talking about how somebody was really discouraged wanting to do all these awesome things for God and wanting to start all these ministries, but he was being faithful and he was trying to do all the things that he could, and he was hoping to just have an impact on the world for God's kingdom, but he was stuck doing other things for the meantime. He was busy with other things. He was stuck in a job that would allow him to do certain things, and he said he reassured him, if you're doing what God's calling you to do and you're being faithful and you're being obedient, you're exactly where he needs you to be. You're in the exact situation that you need to be in for whatever reason. If you're being faithful to God, he's not steering you in the wrong direction. So when you're at that point where you're, maybe you're under a broom tree of isolation, out in some mental or spiritual wilderness, just kind of feeling like it's time to give up. I can't keep pushing. Remember that God sees us there. That's the only canopy over anything out in the desert, and you couldn't hide from God under it, even if you wanted to. God saw him, he provided for him, he met his every need, as simple as those needs were. And think of how much we overthink our needs. I need this and this and this for things to be right. Maybe a little water and a little chunk of bread and a little nap would do us a lot of good. Sometimes it's the simplest things, and if we really seek God and seek his direction, he's going to give us a clarity that helps us to really see what it is that we need, rather than things that steal our attention.